Our speaker today is Professor Philip Clayton, Ingram Professor at Claremont School of Theology. He writes and speaks widely in the evolution of human consciousness and spirituality, and he examines how contemporary science and religious traditions can work together. He's the author of, or editor of dozens of books and 300 articles. He's the president of the Institute for Ecological Civilization, which works internationally with leaders and policymakers to implement the kind of radical change that are essential for the thriving of this, on this planet. Please welcome, we're so happy to have him here, Professor Philip Clayton.
Do you care which podium I use? Is there like a right podium and a wrong podium? Left and right? Where's my ear? All I can say to you is finally, there is something so comfortable about being in an assembly like this. I come from a tradition called Quakers. We don't have any required beliefs, but we try to live well and help often. And to have a place where there won't be judgments of doctrine is so refreshing that I just want to celebrate being in this space with you, and hope that I can add to and share. I think we walk some common ground together, and we are good. Most of all, I love the poem, because in a sense, that's the perfect encapsulation for what I want to talk about. I want to be in a room where we can look at what the facts are and not begin taking our time to deny them. But when we have that starting point where we don't have to fight about that, can we then find some unlikely allies? That's what I want to look at today. The background of the environmental situation is already clear to you all. Normally I would spend 30 slides going through the data of all the different areas. Today, however, I have only one, I promise. And that slide is the choice slide. It's the slide where the line, the tendency is the orange line going up, and humanity changing is the blue line holding. This is the data slide that matters the most. Numbers that seem to say there's no chance and we're all going to hell in a handbasket, we're aware of those. But one that says, hey, it's up to us, that's the really crucial one. Because it raises the questions for us. How should we respond? What can we do? And what might motivate us to do these things? These are the slides that bring the decision back to us. Goes without saying, the data slides say it, but we already know. Our footprint is a frightening one. And it doesn't help to give the blame or the credit or the saving to some other level of reality. You know, one of the things that infuriates me the most was at the beginning of Reagan era, the neocons were coming into power, and later it was released what some of the position papers were that were prepared for Reagan as he came into office 79, 80 after the election. And there was one about forestry policy. And it said, well, we know that Jesus is coming back, so we're not going to put our good money into saving the forests because they're going to be left behind. There was a series of books, Left Behind, right? You don't want to get left behind, Raptures in the Clouds. And if there's any sentence that would just turn me livid, it's that sense that we just don't have to worry about this world around us, because that's going to be taken care of. I want to do exactly the opposite of that as we explore today. We're just back from University of the Western Cape, Cape Town, South Africa. 2 weeks ago, we did a conference, 150 registrants, 15 countries, scientists talking about increasing water scarcity and what are the things that can be done. And we looked at the natural and environmental sciences, technical sciences, but also at civil society, politics, economics, a holistic approach to understanding the change. This is the university where, the post-apartheid university, where the constitution of post-apartheid South Africa was written, 95% black and colored, and yet the host for Stellenbosch, that former racist university of all of Southern Africa, University of the Western Cape, University of Cape Town, the super brainy and mostly white. This university hosted an amazing international conference, national, provincial, city government present, scientists flown in from around Africa. Inspiring results, concrete suggestions. And my question to you is, will they happen? What does it take to get things to actually happen? Oh, good. You guys started the timer late. I guess I'm good. No, I'll keep it short. And there are certain people who stand in the way. I'm not going to show any pictures on this one. We celebrate changes like COP21 in Paris. Huge breakthrough, right? And yet COP25 in Madrid a few weeks ago, mostly total failure. Nobody trusts what the leaders are doing behind the doors, right? And yet, something is changing. The newspapers weren't covering what they were talking about in their stupid sessions. They were covering a little girl, a 17-year-old girl, on a boat who was landing in Lisbon. And I remember one newspaper report that said, everyone's holding their breath to see what happens when Greta arrives. Can I hear a round of applause for Greta? I mean, come on, girl. I just love her exchanges with Trump because she's one person in the world that doesn't seem... I want to see her run for president, right? If only she were an American citizen. I don't know if you can read it, but so ridiculous. Greta, has to work on her anger. And here she says, a teenager working on her anger management problem, this is her tweet, currently chilling and watching a good old-fashioned movie with a friend. Just flawless. Somebody said she must be scripted. No 17-year-old could talk like that. I said, partly because she's on the spectrum. I have a kid on the spectrum. You don't script kids on the spectrum. At least that's what I've learned as a dad over the last 17 years. She represents civil society, and that represents a change. My favorite moment at COP25, which was a failure, was the press room, and the CEO of Shell comes in to make some statement about how great we are, and actually gets booed out of the room. So his handlers have to surround him, and he has to escape the room without getting to the podium, because the world said no more bullshit. Stop it. And that's civil society. That's the hope, I think, that I want to get to. Here's a man I want to tell you a story about. This is Peter Doherty, won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1996. Education, he says, is clearly the key if we're to build a greater appreciation of science into both the political and the public consciousness. So Peter began traveling the world after he won the Nobel Prize, showing climate data, and was very famous for that. So I called him up and said, we're organizing World Parliament of Religions in Melbourne, 2009. Would you come and speak about the climate data? And he said, yes, I will go anywhere. I'm not religious, I don't like religion, I have nothing to do with it, but I'm going to come. And he came to the World Parliament, which is, I'll come back to that in a moment, this huge meeting. There were over 10,000 people, opened by the indigenous peoples of Australia. Just a phenomenal time. He spoke to a session with 600 people in the room that we organized, gave the climate data, and then he walked to the front of the stage, and he said, look, I just need to tell you, this is a pretty uncomfortable place for me. You're all religious, and I'm not. This is not very... where I usually hang out, but having traveled the world for the last 13 years, I find out data is not enough. There has to be something that changes the human heart. You represent religions, and you have hundreds of years, thousands of years of changing how people live in the world. Now, I don't agree with most of what you're worried about, but you know how to change people's living. Could we become partners? It was really a moving moment. Nobel Prize winners sort of asking this motley crew of people of all kinds of outfits and colors on, join me. I know the data. You guys have to know the data. And my data is not changing lives. Do you get the point? That unlikely partnership, those unlikely allies are the ones they want to focus on. And here's the reason. We have this little thing called the amygdala. It's an acorn-shaped piece, and it's the emotion center. We often call it the fear center, part of the limbic system. The data going out from the amygdala goes straight up into the prefrontal cortex, where you do your rational thought. And so it tells your rational part of your brain, run, we're gonna die! Or, that must be a lion behind that tree. Or whatever evolution led it to do. And the trouble is, your prefrontal cortex does not have wiring back down to the amygdala to say, shut the hell up, that's just a twig. Or, no, I know that his skin color is different, but that doesn't mean you should hate him. We just didn't evolve to shut down the amygdala. So it's in there screaming at you the whole time. She's different. He doesn't look the same. They don't believe what you believe. And it tends to shut down rational thought and create in-group, out-group distinctions. That's how we're made biologically. So the in-group circles the wagons and protects itself, and the out-group becomes subhuman. Do you understand? That's why the data from Peter Doherty didn't get through. That's why my 30 charts of climate change aren't getting through. And that's why we need a kind of ally that we don't currently have. Make sense? And I want to push that a little bit, because it seems to me that religion may have a role to play here. So, at its best, religion concerns itself with the deepest values, with injustices in the quest for justice for all, with peace over violence, with the sacredness of life, with the protection of the most vulnerable lives, human and non-human. Oops. With all sentient beings, as the Buddha taught, hence with every species and ecosystem. At its best, I think that's true. Interesting. At its worst, religion concerns itself with, well, you already know. That's a long slide for me. It was like 27 slides. I thought I should summarize it down. Okay. But I wanted to get the at its best part out there because I have certain prejudice responses, out-group responses toward a lot of religious folks. Maybe I can admit that here. You know? They got built into me from some harsh experiences. Here's a religious guy named John Cobb. This is my next example. Guy's 95 now. He did a conference in 1971 inviting religious leaders together, and the title of the conference was, Is It Too Late? Is it too late to avert environmental catastrophe? 1971. Prophetic, huh? Published a book. One of the first books called Eco-Theology. And this guy really gets it, what's wrong with religion. Though he remains Methodist or something. Okay, and I'm just going to let you read that for a second. So he recognizes that folks' interest in traditional religion is dropping. And I highlighted in yellow the most important sentence. But I think, says John Cobb, the deepest reason that folks are leaving may be that what we, he's speaking of himself here, what we do and say does not seem to be terribly important. Is there a part of religion that can actually get into the area where something important happens? So John Cobb spent his life writing books with titles like For the Common Good, Redirecting the Economy, The Liberation of Life, about biology, and this recent book, For Our Common Home, which I also wrote for. We published this book 6 weeks after the Pope had published this encyclical in 2015 called Laudato Si', an encyclical written not to Catholics but to the whole world and celebrating all life forms, not just humanity. Now, a lot of it's way too conservative for me. I was listening to you guys say you both come from Catholic backgrounds, right? So there's parts of it that I can't affirm. But boy, if there was a rock star pope, you know, this guy comes closer. Have you seen The Two Popes? Has anyone seen that? Brilliant. I think it's going to win. It's a nominated for an Academy Award, Best Actor, right? But it didn't win it, right? Pretty hot. The idea that we might find within the Catholic world a support for all human beings and all living things is powerful. And a Christian theologian who would be writing on that, he's an unlikely ally for a lot of us, but somebody I can't dismiss. He could help to move people in that inner way from the inside to the outside. Right, here's the rational stuff. This is the kind of thing we do in the Institute for Ecological Civilization. We look at all the different areas, looking for a safe and just space for humanity and inclusive economic development, so that the social foundation in the center is solid. Justice and natural science coming together. We're a secular organization. Here, let's try another one. You can see the various sectors, but what I want to highlight, I don't know if we have a... Is there a pointer? No, it's not working. What we have, a number of these include more subjective parts of human being. Spirituality, religion, worldviews, philosophy, ethics. So the hard science and that subjective side of humanity fit together. That's actually crucial. Again, we can't dichotomize. Our brains don't dichotomize. We need to take all the parts of what we are as human beings to work together. So here we have things like the transformative power of the arts, reimagining and reinventing culture. Part of the answer is to dig down to where we actually inhabit. That's why you guys open with a poem. We include a poem, right? Because it gets a part of our brain and self responding that we don't get from rationality alone. Finding hope is the question. David Corton gets at it. Change the story, change the future. Get it? The great turning from empire to earth community. Change the focus as a whole. Find kinds of partnerships that didn't exist before. Reimagine. This is an imagination exercise. In fact, I'm going to shut up and just show you images and see how it might lead you to reimagine. We start with the bleakness of the cities. Here's the Thames after climate change flooding downtown London. But now, just look at these different ways of being. See how it leads? I'll bet I can't move past this spot without feedback, right? Okay, I'm just going to be still and just think of the mode of living if we were living in a way like this. We should turn down the lights. I don't know if it's possible to turn off the front light for the images. Now I started to get cynical, I guess, I'm afraid. Look at this. And most cynical of all, shit. At least he's got a beer, so he's okay. So again, can we change the mindset from dystopian to imagining a different way of being in the world? The theme suggested here, I'll just show, can we use different language? Can we include fact and value together? Can we find that balance of left and right brain? And most importantly, can we find partnerships with different kinds of communities, including those with beliefs very different than our own? Can we find something in spirituality, with or without God's part, that leads us to a richer naturalism, a nature spirituality, to a practice of sort of horizontal transcendence? The cell biologist Ursula Goodenough puts it beautifully. She says, I experience the same kind of awe and reverence when I contemplate the structure of an enzyme or the flowing of a signal transduction cascade as when I watch the moon rise or stand in front of a Mayan temple. My favorite words, same rush, same rapture. No conflict for her between the scientific data and those experiences. Can we find some unlikely allies on the religion side who could help us to move more deeply into this world that we actually inhabit and supplement the facts with something that moves the heart? If we had time, I would show you this clip, the pale blue dot from Carl Sagan. Anyone know Carl Sagan's work? I bet a lot of you guys do. This is easy. This kind of spirituality for a lot of us, there's no block there. It's accessible to us. You know, the point is, we only have this one planet seen here from the moon. There's no other one to turn to. How we organize our life and the life for future generations on this planet, that's what counts. It's very much a spirituality call, isn't it? But one which is horizontal, living more deeply into our life on this planet, living well. I want to close in the last 3 minutes by mentioning some unlikely allies. Just going to touch on them and then leave it sort of to tease you a little bit. Hopefully some of you will be staying for the round table afterwards, where Claudia and I will be exploring with you the ways to build these kind of alliances outside of our normal categories. What are some ways that people are suggesting, and how might we, if I can use a we here, be involved in a constructive way in that? Just quick examples. From Judaism, Rabbi Jill Jacob takes this ancient Jewish idea, tikkun olam, to repair the world, said by the devout Jew 3 times a day in daily prayers. And she rethinks it for the world today, fixing large societal problems, asking whether the work I as a Jewish rabbi am doing makes our society as a whole function in a more positive way, allowing the most vulnerable members of society to live fully realized lives. If we ask those questions and can say yes, then our work is worthy of being deemed tikkun olam, helping to repair the world. It's beautiful. There's an ally. I'd love to walk side by side and work side by side with Rabbi Jacob. You know who this is? Thich Nhat Hanh, Buddhist monk recently deceased. The core of Buddhism is compassion. And humans aren't singled out. There's no God. But it's one engages in the practice of compassion meditation. Maybe 10,000 hours a monk may have meditated for the liberation of all sentient beings. So a compassion that flows to absolutely everything that exists. My favorite picture, Buddhist monks are ordaining trees, putting the robe of a monk on a tree, so that in Cambodia and Thailand, when the loggers come in to cut down the forest, they can't do it because they're Buddhist. That would be like killing a monk. So the men put down their saws and say, I won't cut down this forest, because the monks have ordained this tree. Powerful use of traditional practice to protect the forest. Process of ordaining the tree. And there's a head of the Buddha, there we go, inside. Hardest for me is Islam. I'm going to have to skip over the other slides, but this is from Fethullah Gulen, an imam in Turkey, actually the one that the President Erdogan has hated so much. Just look at what he says. Humankind from time to time has denied religion in the name of science, or science in the name of religion, because they conflict. But, he says, all knowledge belongs to God, and religion is from God. How then can the two be in conflict? And if we had time, I would go through some of the key points from Islam. The environment is God's creation. Nature was created for a purpose. We protect God's creatures by protecting the environment. Nature is sacred. And in each case with verses from Quran. This is a religion that I personally have a lot of trouble with. I struggle with. But to find that human beings have responsibility toward the environment, teaching of water control. Nature was created for not just for humankind's use, and justice and balance are universal law of God. There's something there that we could in principle make contact with. Things that can be done through church buildings, religious buildings are powerful. Education again. So rethinking religion, this is what I get. A community of values, of sharing, of interdependence, and spiritual community. Could we use them as allies together with the science to help bring about the change. Let me close. Learn to listen and accept difference. Then we learn to share the resources of our own traditions, secular or religious, sacred, and then to work side by side for the sake of the planet. I'm looking for a re-enchanted, liberating science that we could engage in, that would also let us recognize the mystery in the world around us. Not an opposition, but a chance for unlikely allies. That, I think, is exciting. Thanks very much.